You stop again? Well, you should have. I heard groundhog's good to eat. I never eat it. I put it in a pile and hopefully shoot some pouches over it. I've heard that. There's got the big ones too. They were pretty. Their pelts would be good. Their pelts were good. But nobody wants to.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Glad to see everybody with us this evening. Glad to see David and Sandra back with us. Sandra, we're glad to see them equally. They've been under the weather the past couple of days. We're glad to see them back and Sandra back from her cruise. But we're glad that everyone can be here this evening. I still know there's a few others who are sick. We do need to make an announcement, at least to begin with. One of the people who works at the local dump, his name is Pete Light. He was found face down, unconscious, and Jeff, y'all's brother-in-law, found him there. He's in the hospital right now, and they're not sure what exactly happened to him. He's kind of in his upper 60s, lower 70s. So he is at the hospital trying to recover. If we can get some more information, we'll give that to everyone. That way we can see if we can contact him because he's not doing too well. So keep Pete Lipe, L-I-P-E, in your prayers, and we'll get you more info soon. Lipe, L-I-P-E. Okay, Jacob, can you lead us in a word of prayer? Amen. Ecclesiastes 2. Very interesting text as we leave chapter 1 with this idea of venturing into the wisdom found within life. The preacher would say that he set his heart, in verse 16, set his heart to understand knowledge and wisdom, and to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. But he perceived that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Chapter 1 ends with this warning of sorts that we find in verse 15 and verse 18 of chapter 1, of basically saying God has made things the way they are. Things is as things is, so to speak. And if we try to create a view of life that God never intended from the beginning, we're bound to mess up in finding our true ultimate purpose in life. And he also gives this other warning at the end of the text, basically by saying this: if you're not going to be honest with the reality of things, you are going to find grief. It could be the case that what we are going to read tonight, and even onward to the end of the book, that there could be certain individuals, like the rich young ruler, who asked Jesus, "What one thing must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he asks him, "What's your understanding of the law?" And he answers that correctly. But what do I need to do? And having compassion on him, it would tell us Jesus said, "Go and sell what you have to the poor and come and follow me. Do that and you'll be good." And he went away sorrowful because he had many great possessions. If you value this life too much, then what you're going to read from chapter 2 onward is going to be a hard, grievous battle because you're struggling with materialism. When we look in the beginning of chapter 2, what we're going to find is a test with wisdom that's combined with embrace everything this life has to offer. In fact, what we're simply going to do as we go through the text, I'm not going to add really that many other texts from the rest of the Bible until we get to the end of this section, because really the beginning of chapter 2 goes all the way to chapter 7 and verse number 1. So what I read in chapter 2 to 6 is going to be this. I want to know what happens if I look at life from a pleasure-filled, materialistic-filled perspective. And I want to see what problems may come along the way. Notice in chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, he gives us a prelude into what he's going to venture into. I said in my heart, "Come now, and I will test you with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth. What does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives." I find it interesting that when you look at verse 1, the word for mirth also translates into the word joy. Literally, I tested my heart with what I thought would bring me happiness. And isn't that what everybody wants in life? I just want to be happy. I want to find true joy, joy that can't be taken away from me. I want to indulge myself with everything I could possibly desire. And if I do that, then I'll actually find fulfillment and purpose in life. So when he tests this, notice what his findings are. It gives us a preview of this in verse number 2. Well, really the end of verse 1 going into verse 2. I said of laughter, it is madness. Quite literally, in the Hebrew, I found it to make you a fool. You can laugh all you want. You can put on a face and pretend that you're happy. But in the end, it's just a facade. It's just a mask. It doesn't actually bring you joy. You're just laughing. And of mirth, what can it actually accomplish? Quite literally in the Hebrew, what will it bring about? What will it produce? I think in the text it would say, what will it manufacture? Which is weird in the Hebrew language. But this is the idea. Where will just enjoying the pleasures of life, where will it actually take you? And this is important. More than likely, at some point in your life, you said, or may have said, this doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. You may have said, it's my life, it's my choice, I've been bound by rules for so long, I'm going to live my own life the way I want to, and nobody's going to tell me what to do because I'm mature and I'm smart and I've earned this right. I'm a grown-up. And we've all had that rebellious phase at some point. As I read through chapter 2 and 3, a thought kept coming back to my mind, and even after the study, it made me think, if most young adults who think hanging out at a bar all night long is living life, they've probably failed to actually read Ecclesiastes. There's the ending conclusion points to this, and I'll explain why I bring that up here in a little bit. How he's going to make this guideline for this. He gives us 3 things. I want to live my life the way that I want to. Quite literally, I'm going to fill myself with, notice he would say in verse 3, gratify my flesh with wine. Another way of saying that, even the New Testament uses this as a figure of speech. An elder is not to be given over to wine or much wine, and deacons, it would say, they're not to be given to wine. The idea is that they know how to control themselves in matters of entertainment, pleasure. That's the idea. I know what I find satisfactory, but I also know the limitations of it. What Solomon is saying here is that I chose to take everything that I could possibly want because it's my life. But he would also say that I'm also going to use wisdom. I'm an adult. I know what's good. I know what's wrong. I'm not dumb. I'm not a little kid. You heard people make those arguments? But he would use one other test. And he would say, until, notice, there's a time for this, till I might see. Because he wasn't sure, maybe this test might not work out the way that I want it to. So till I see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. I promise I'll be careful. I'm not a kid anymore. I know what I need to do. Yes, I've heard this all my life. And how many of us making those same accusations to our parents or people who were trying to warn us when we were little, we still messed up? That's what the preacher is presenting here. I had this idea that I could go places without people's help, without their guidance, without their wisdom, treating me like a kid. And let's see where it turned out. Now, keep verse 3 in mind because it's going to come back in this next section. Till I might see. How long did it take you to realize you don't have as much control of your life as you thought you did? Notice how he's going to go through this. And we'll just go straight through the text. We're not going to go much into it. But in verse 4 up to about verse 11, notice everything that he does to test the idea of what brings about pleasure. Now, when we think about pleasure, we tend to think of like fleshly things that gratify the body. It's actually a bigger subject or topic of discussion because it could be like a certain hobby brings you mirth in life, or a certain activity brings you mirth in life. It could be lust of the flesh brings you mirth in life. But it's a very broad category. Notice how Solomon describes this, beginning in verse 4. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the olive groves, and I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and special treasures of the kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. I find it interesting. He begins in verse number 4 basically saying, look at all the great achievements that I've done in my life? Have you ever said, I want to make something of my life. I want to do something good. I want to be remembered or receive some kind of recognition for my skill. I find it interesting, this idea of works begins with the greatest project we read of Solomon outside of the temple project in 1 Kings chapter 7. He says houses. He built a house for himself, which took about 13 years to build. In fact, I believe he built another house for one of his wives that would take about 7 years, along with the 13 years. And then you look at the other things that he built here. Notice, in light of building the house, he made vineyards. How long does it take to get the property, level the property, put the right soil in the property that you have, also like build fences around that property, and then you got to have the right kind of equipment on that property. And I know it's 900 BC-ish in the times of Solomon, but they also had to cultivate the ground to prepare it so that it could grow grapes or whatever else they had in their vineyard. But it wasn't just a vineyard. Notice the next one. I planted trees, all kinds of fruits. In fact, in the following verse, it would say that he made an irrigation system which to water the growing trees of the grove. Every time I look in the Old Testament in relation to the word grove, it's always connected to olive trees or olive groves. It would basically be get this, the original Olive Garden. I thought that was cool. But they didn't have breadsticks. That was somewhere else. But that's the idea. How long does it take to grow fruit trees? Well, it depends on what kind of tree you're planting. But fruit trees, compared to vegetable gardens, they take much longer and a lot more care and time and attention. And this wasn't just like a small orchard. We're talking about acres upon acres upon acres of private property. In fact, when you look at the end of Song of Solomon, the Shulamite woman would say Solomon has thousands of gardens, and I have my one. And people tend to his about 200 servants. In fact, he even mentions the servants. The point I'm getting at is, how long did it take Solomon to do all of this? Remember verse 3. Till I understood what folly was. Grasp the idea. What is senseless in this life? He spent what could be 13 up to about 30, maybe. I don't think it would necessarily be 40, because that's getting into a time frame of his life that really is where he starts to fall apart. But it could have been 40 years. Here's the point I'm getting at. How long did it take you to recognize you couldn't do what you thought you could? You didn't have the freedom that you presumed that you were mature enough to already know that you could do. And that's what Solomon is trying to emphasize here. I did these amazing things, and if someone was telling you what they've been doing in life, and they say, well, I've built a couple houses, I've made my own vineyard business, and I have my own orchards, I've made my own irrigation system, I've even bought a couple hundred butlers to work at my house and landscapers to work at my home. And I've got all kinds of cattle and sheep all around. I've opened a farm. What would it sound like you're hearing from that person if they're saying that's what they've done in their, get this, spare time? They're doing good, aren't they? They're doing well. We would actually say they got it made. Look at verse 10 and 11. If we were to ask Solomon, okay, what do you find this got you? In verse number 10, notice, here's his response. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I had no restriction whatsoever. I didn't withhold my heart from any pleasure, and my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Paraphrase. I got what I made. That's all I got. I didn't get anything more. I didn't get anything less. I got what I got. And I looked, verse 11, on all the works that my hands had done, on the labor in which I toiled, and indeed, here's his findings. It was vanity. It was pointless. It quickly passed. By the time I finished all this, I didn't get to enjoy any of the time I spent trying to labor for it. Notice the terminology. That he labored, toiled. That's not a pleasant word. That implies hard work. It implies a blood, sweat, and tears type mindset. In fact, he would say it's more than just vanity. It was grasping for the wind. And there was no profit under the sun. At the end of all this, I looked at it and I started seeing all my accomplishments, and here's what I came out with. You may say I have it made. I say this is meaningless. All of it, meaningless. Mansions, palaces, vineyards, groves, irrigation, ranch, servants, all of it. Even, I missed this part, I bought my own musicians. I bought the pop bands of my day. Now that's what I call ancient music, volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have the book of Psalms playing literally in the palace, and people love to hear it. I bought the greatest bands of the day, and I have any musical instrument that any refined artist would desire in his home. And he still says, it's a waste. It's all a waste. Now, how does he get to that kind of conclusion? What would you call someone who would have all those great things, at least the way that the human mind would see it? What mindset would we need to have in order for us to say, dude, you're crazy. Look at all what you got. I don't know about you, but I think I would probably say those things if I were envious or jealous, or I was coveting some of the things that they had. And I'm not recognizing that's what I'm saying when I'm trying to cause them to stop regretting what you've done and embrace it and enjoy it and take it for all it's worth. But that's not what Solomon is saying. Notice he explains this reason why this is his finding. Notice beginning in verse 12. I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can man do that succeeds the king? Only what's already done. At the end of the day, even if I excel what the king has done, I've only done the same things the king has done. I've only just done it a little bit more. What if I don't hit where the king made it in his accomplishments of life and I hit down below? Well, I'm still doing the same things the king before me did, but I'm still doing the same stuff he did. He just had more stuff. That's it. What can someone do more than the king? Nothing. It's already been done. Verse 13, so I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. This understanding, Solomon is saying, it's clear as day and night. Don't believe me? Just go drive without your headlights on tonight. Please don't. Please don't. We get what happens when you don't turn them on. You can't see. It's hard to drive when you can't see, right? So continue his thought here. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness, yet I myself perceive that the same event happens to them all. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then the more wise? Then I said in my heart, this is also vanity, for there is no remembrance of the wise over the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As a fool. Therefore, I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. When I look at the why, he brings up a couple of different ideas. First off, he starts with this idea. You know, the king before me did the same thing. We just said that. But regardless whether I'm a wise man or a foolish man, it doesn't matter how wise I am or how well accomplished I am. Same thing happens to both human beings. There's a death point. And even if he's less accomplished than me, what has he actually achieved rather than I? I've stressed my whole life over these things. Notice the terminology in verse number 18. I was distressed. I was stressing hard. And I hated life. Quite literally, verse 17, I'm losing my mind, my sanity. That is the Hebrew word for hate, sanity. I'm losing my mind over everything that I've done. You ever lost your mind over something? You spent so much time on it, and that is your only focus, and you're getting really aggravated because you can't do the things that you really want to do, and it takes you longer than other people to do the same things. The findings of Solomon are this: I'm losing my sanity. This distressed me. It bothered me. And then the end of verse 17. It's all vanity. It's grasping for the wind. I've spent all this time, I don't get to keep it, I've been stressing over it, and I just stressed more all my life than the fool who did absolutely nothing, and he got to enjoy his life, or at least it looked like he enjoyed it, and at the end of the day, what do I get out of it? The same thing the fool does. I lose it all. I die. This is a very encouraging book, isn't it? It's supposed to aim that direction for a reason. Notice he continues this thought as he reflects on this specific reason. Beginning in verse 18, he's going to give us a couple of parallels that we're going to find, but then he's going to give us some examples as we get to the end of this chapter. Notice he would say, I hated all my labor in the sun, which I toiled under the sun, because I had to leave it to the man who will come after me. Now, is it necessarily wrong to leave an inheritance for someone? No, that's not what this text is talking about. Notice what he's saying. Everything that I've spent my life's work, my ambitions, my dreams for, I had to leave it to someone. And that implies he gets to enjoy it much longer than me, who appreciated it, worked hard for it, and he's not going to have the same respect and awe and care for it as I've spent trying to build for this, work for this moment. So, who knows, verse 19, whether he's going to be wise or a fool. Yet he'll rule over all my labor, which I toiled, in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This is quickly passing. It's vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I toiled under the sun. For there's a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This is also a vanity and a great evil. Not in the sense of sin, but it is simply one of the disappointments of the limitedness of this life. We don't get to keep our stuff, and it's designed that way for a reason. It'll explain it here in a moment. Verse 22, what is a man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart for which he has toiled under the sun? What do I actually get at the end of my life after working so hard? And this is the reality that I'm facing. Well, if you think that's what's worth living for, notice verse 23. All of his days are sorrowful, and his work is burdensome. Even in the night, his heart takes no rest. This is also vanity. Quite literally, I spent all my life working for this. I stressed a lot. I didn't get to enjoy it as much as I wanted. I worked night and day, blood, sweat, and tears over this. And it all ends faster than I wanted it to end. I wanted to enjoy this much longer than what it did. And I thought I had more time. And just in the end, it's all vanity. It's gone So notice verse 24 through 26. Here comes a conclusion that's going to kick us into the next chapter. Now, before we read those verses, I need to tell you what the text is not saying before you start to make some conclusions. It's not saying don't work hard. It's also not saying don't set goals or put in the work necessary to accomplish what you want to do. Chapter 3 is going to explain God set it up this way, but he wants you to enjoy the work and labor that you do the way he designed work to be enjoyed. Which sounds strange, because there's some jobs you probably had where you could probably care less to clock in that day, let alone that week or ever. But there's probably some jobs you've had where you loved it. You love the people, you love the environment. It's just a good job. Well, work is work in one sense, but sometimes you can have a different attitude towards work. Notice verse 24. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should be satisfied and enjoy the good in his labor. This I saw. This is important, because this is the first observation we get after Solomon has spent 13 to maybe 30 plus years of his life to get to this point. Here's what I finally realized as I'm now an old man. This idea of labor and hard work and what you do in your life, I saw was from the hand of God. So who can eat or who can have enjoyment over my labors more than myself, more than I? For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. This is also vanity and grasping for wind. When I look at his reflections, what do you actually get out of the work? Well, you get a lot of stress, yeah. There is a sense of accomplishment. And this is the latter part of what we're getting at about hard work. When I look at what God wants me to get out of my hard labors, notice this. In the first part of verse 24, take time to enjoy your talents. Talents are something that are amazing from God. I struggle from a human standpoint. When we read passages, like I said, I wasn't going to connect this to other passages. That's up to this point. I struggle to understand at times the Philippians 2 concept of let no one be high-minded, or let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, esteem others better than yourself. And I think of Timothy at the end of Philippians 2, where he would care more about others than he would himself. I find it hard when I look at what everybody in the congregation is interested in. There are simply some topics I just in my life have not found interesting. It doesn't mean I don't care about them, but this is what I'm getting at. If you are good at farming, praise be to God, that's your talent. Use that talent for the glory of God. Enjoy farming. If your talent is sports, praise be to God, you have athleticism and you can move and you can inspire people. Use that for the glory of God. If it's with entertainment or like writing or drawing, praise be to God. Use that for the glory of God. God made all these things to be enjoyed, and there's a certain skill set in whatever profession or hobby that you have. There are really, really skilled and talented people in those areas. So do the work necessary to become one of the most talented, if that is your desire in that field. And enjoy the process. Enjoy the work. The labor will pay off. God's not saying don't work hard. What he is saying is if you make your life all about work and all about money, at the end of your life, you'll have nothing more than regret. And in the end, nothing to show for it. Oh. But I also find in the second half of verse 24, this is how God designed this to be. God designed work for you to enjoy. That is the reality of the situation. In verse 25, you'll appreciate what you've done better than anyone else. So embrace it. Love it. Enjoy the journey. Because this is the only time you get to do this. We only get to live one time. So make the most of it, is what God wants us to realize. In verse 26, it would tell us God has given us a way. Now this is important because it's going to explain why chapter 3 does what it does. If I have the right wisdom, the right knowledge, and true joy, then I'm going to understand certain things that God's going to talk about through the preacher here in chapter 3. He's going to give me a way to enjoy this, and he's going to bring out a very broad range of categories. Just keep that in mind. But also I found this interesting. At the end of verse 26, when it talks about God gives God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy to a man who's good in his sight. He'll talk about that more in chapter 3. But to the sinner, he gives the work of gathering and collecting that he may give to him who is good before God. I found this interesting. God takes the pursuits of sinners and what they really work for hard in life, and everything that they gain and that they collect, God uses them to give even more to His people. Have you found yourself doing the same thing over and over and getting so much, but then it seems like you've done nothing at all? Could it be? Could it be? God is trying to show you there's a different way to go about this. You're only hurting what you could be enjoying and embracing. And this is where the wisdom, knowledge, and joy truly comes from. When I look in the beginning of chapter 3, and I move from testing purpose with mirth, a wise man will understand two things other than his purpose in life. He'll understand something very important about his labors. It's only a matter of time. To everything, there is a purpose under heaven. Notice the man who labors and works understands not every day is equal, in the sense of some days are harder than others. Some days are a breeze, and then you're wondering, what's going on? Nothing happened today. We call that easy days. Well, in terms of life, we experience that. Think of this in light of your ambitions and what you work for. When God looks at an individual who is good in His eyes, in a person's pursuits in life, He will apply the wisdom that God gives and the knowledge that God gives with that wisdom, and he can even find joy while he's in the process of getting better at what he wants to work toward. Notice in the beginning, chapter 3, verse 1, to everything there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. A man of understanding will understand the reality of how the truth of the matter will work. It may be that even in my own labors, I will never get where I really want to go in my works. That doesn't mean that God is impairing me by maybe taking me earlier than I anticipate. And that's the point. Which one of us can actually pinpoint, I'm dying this day? Well, it's true. Everyone dies on the day that's called today. I've never heard of anyone dying on the day that's called tomorrow when it's still today. Everybody dies on this day, which is why even the invitation call in the beginning of 2 Corinthians chapter 6, while it is today is the day of salvation, it's imploring this. As you continue to work, as you continue to grow in wisdom, you're going to learn the truth. And this is verse 9 through 11 of chapter 3. As you go through these pursuits, and there's setbacks, and there's victories, and there's conquering, and there's exercising and growing, and you're in this constant struggle of trying to grow through your labors and in your work, what profit does the worker have from all which he labors? The preacher would say, I have seen the God-given task. Here's another insight. The God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. God has given you something in this life to work with and work for. And if you fail to realize or recognize the reality of how those setbacks and those victories and drawbacks and continuing to grow works, then you're going to get extremely frustrated with God. So what purpose has God given us this reason? Well, it tells us in verse 10, that's how he designed it, but that hasn't given me the answer yet. Notice in verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Now, normally I would look at that word and say, there is a beauty in death. There is a beauty in plucking things up. But in the Hebrew, get this, Beautiful is a very poetic way of saying this. God has made everything right in its time. It's like God always knows the perfect moment. And He does. When I look at my labors and I look at the toils and the struggles that it creates, when I understand that it's not necessarily about that, but God wants me to grow and He wants me to enjoy it and He wants me to go through this journey of continuing of growing, a man of understanding will understand the limitation that will work towards the greatest end. God has made everything beautiful in its time, but notice the second half of verse 11. He has put eternity in their hearts. I work to make this world better, but my labors are for a greater end, a never-ending story, so to speak. And I don't want it to just build something to remember in this life, but I want people to remember someone or something or a way that will help people live in eternity in a place where there's comfort and there's peace and there's no toiling and there's no distressing or despair or anything negative. It is a place of absolute, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy to the man who does good according to God. If I understand time is my limitation, but I work towards the greatest end, eternity, then even though I may not necessarily do everything I desire in life, I'm okay with that. Because that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to find God. And when I look in verse 12 and following, this will require me to do something as I go through this pursuit of laboring and growing. The preacher says, I know that nothing is better for them, for mankind, than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. Notice this. Why does God want you to enjoy what your talents are? Notice verse 13, the last phrase. That is the gift of God. I connect that idea to the New Testament, the gift of God. Where have you heard that idea connected with in light of the New Testament? Jesus? Salvation? The wages of sin is death. But salvation, that's the gift from God. If I look at the gift that God has given me to embrace in life and enjoy in life and continue growing and even share with others if I so choose, I look at an even greater gift in the New Testament. In this is love. 1 John 4:10, because God did what? Who did He send? He sent a parcel package. He sent mail. All of us got mail. Who was it? Jesus. That is the gift from God. Now you think of that kind of gift and you connect that idea. I know within context of Romans 11:29, the gifts and the givings or the ministry of God are irrevocable. One of those gifts is salvation, but also the enjoyment of your labors and what you strive for in life. God has given you that wonderful gift where if you use it the way that God desires, it will force you to have to come to this conclusion and characteristic. I must be humble in my heart to the Lord all the days of my life. In closing, notice in verse 14 and 15, and we'll just read to the end of this chapter. 14 and 15, and we'll read verse 22. I know that whatever God does, His works, His labors, the houses He builds, the gardens He plants, the vineyards He grows, the gardens He cultivates, it'll be forever. Not me, but God can, but not me. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing can be taken from it. Now God does it. God has set it up this way. Notice this conclusion. God has set up life this way so that man can learn to fear the Lord. When I realize I can't take a single thread of what I own into eternity, God is forcing me to come to a conclusion. I have a definite end. He goes on forever. What do I do since this life has an end? Well, fear God. That's why God's designed it this way. But something else. Verse 15, that which already has been and what is to be has already been. People have already had ambitions, dreams, works, and they've done these wonderful things. And has anybody taken anything with them to show for it in eternity? Nope, not a one. God will require an account of what is past. Man will also know when they will answer for their love that God has shown them. In verse 22, notice the ending conclusion. The preacher would say, I perceive that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, in his heritage. That is what God has given you. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Now it began in chapter 2 and verse 1 by saying, I will test things with joy, mirth. Quite literally, it looks like the word yippee. Literally, it does. Did you know that word also translates to what we find in verse 22, chapter 3, for rejoice? You want to find true joy? You want to find true happiness? You want to find true fulfillment in life and purpose? Do what God made you or made you to be, made you to do. Do that for the glory of God. But do not forget, if that's all you focus on, you forget to humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, you're not going to make it come eternity. So what chapter 2 and 3 really force us to focus on is that if you want to put all your coins, all your beans on what you do and work, 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 and that's all you can focus on, forget about anything else, I just don't have time. Well, you do. God has made a time and a place for everything. You do. But if you do all those, but in the bigger picture, you're working toward eternity and you're helping others along the way, then you're doing exactly what God has always asked you to do. Fear Him, love Him in everything you say and do, and He'll help you come eternity. Thank you for your time and attention. I know that's a lot to go through. We're going to slow down a lot next week as we jump into chapter 4, where we look at oppression, a life full of sadness, trials, temptations. But God has an answer through this. So thank you for your time and attention. We'll be back here in just a few moments.